When Marcus Whitmore screamed, "These filthy hands will never touch my car," he had no idea the mechanic in coveralls was the daughter of the man he'd betrayed and destroyed. What she revealed next shattered his world completely. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Prestige Motors as Marcus Whitmore walked through the entrance like he owned the air itself. At 42, he had built an investment banking fortune that put him among New York's wealthiest men. Every detail of his appearance screamed success. His custom Tom Ford suit moved like a second skin. His Italian leather shoes clicked with authority on the marble floor. His platinum watch caught the light with each movement. He approached the service desk with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. Behind him, a tow truck carefully unloaded his midnight black Bentley Continental GT. More than just transportation, it was a declaration of his dominance over the ordinary world. Mr. Whitmore, Gerald, the service manager, rushed over with practiced deference. "We received your call about the transmission. We'll have our best team on it immediately." Marcus barely lifted his gaze from his phone, where stock alerts continuously promised another 5-figure gain. Money made while he breathed. "Tomorrow evening, non-negotiable. I have the Vanderbilt Charity Gala, and I'm not showing up in anything less than perfection. Senators will be there, board members, people who actually matter in this city." "Of course, sir." However, our senior technician called in sick, and, "I don't care about your staffing problems." Marcus cut him off with casual cruelty. "Find someone competent. That's what I pay you for." Gerald's face flushed. "We have an excellent technician available. She's quite exceptional with luxury imports." Marcus paused, eyes narrowing. "She?" "Yes, sir. Sarah Mitchell. She's been with us 3 months, and her work has been impeccable. She trained at—" "No. I'm sorry?" "I said no." Marcus's voice carried across the showroom. "I don't want some woman working on my car. Get me someone who knows what they're doing." Several clients glanced over, faces registering surprise at his tone. A well-dressed woman near the magazine rack whispered something to her companion. The receptionist, Jennifer, gripped her pen so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. "Sir, Miss Mitchell is extremely qualified. Do I look like I care about certifications?" Marcus stepped closer, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm paying premium prices. I want a real mechanic, not some diversity hire who probably can't tell a carburetor from a steering wheel." Tense silence fell across the showroom like a heavy blanket. Other customers pretended to study brochures and examine vehicles, but their attention was magnetically drawn to the confrontation unfolding before them. Through the glass partition, a figure in coveralls stopped working mid-motion and turned toward the commotion, wrench still in hand. "Mr. Whitmore, please. I'm a very important client," Marcus said louder, "and I refuse to have my property touched by someone who's probably only here to fill a quota." The service bay door opened. As she approached, Marcus saw her clearly for the first time. Early 30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, a smudge of grease marking her cheek like war paint. Her hands, those hands that would soon reveal so much, showed the honest wear of someone who worked with their body and not just their mind. She carried herself with a quiet dignity he was incapable of recognizing, too blinded by his own sense of superiority. "Mr. Morrison," she addressed Gerald calmly. "If there's an issue with my assignment, perhaps we should discuss it privately." Marcus looked her over with undisguised contempt. "There's nothing to discuss. This is a precision machine, not some pickup truck." Sarah met his gaze directly. For a moment, Marcus felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. "I understand your concerns, sir. The Bentley Continental GT is sophisticated. The W12 engine requires specific torque specifications. Your transmission issues likely relate to the valve body assembly, which needs particular care to avoid damaging the mechatronic unit." Marcus's jaw tightened. Anyone can memorize a manual. "True," Sarah agreed. "But not everyone can diagnose that your specific issue is probably a faulty solenoid pack rather than clutch pack failure. And not everyone would know your vehicle's build date means it has the updated transmission cooling system requiring different service procedures." Silence. Even Marcus had no immediate response. "I don't care what you think you know." His voice rose. "I don't want you touching my car. Is that clear?" Something flickered across Sarah's face. the look of someone who'd been underestimated countless times. But underneath was something else. Pity? Crystal clear, sir. She turned to Gerald. I'll go back to the Mercedes. As she walked away, Marcus felt irrational triumph. He'd established dominance. This was how the world worked. Find me a real technician, he told Gerald. Gerald looked pained. I'll make calls, but we won't have your vehicle ready by tomorrow evening. That's your problem. Marcus settled into the luxury waiting area, monitoring his investments. But fragments of conversation drifted over. Can't believe he talked to her like that. Sarah's probably the best technician they've ever had. An older salesman's voice. That woman knows more about high-performance engines than anyone I've met in 30 years. Then words that chilled Marcus's blood. Mr. Whitmore doesn't know who he's talking to. If he did, he'd be on his knees apologizing. Who was she? The question nagged, but his pride wouldn't allow him to ask. Gerald returned, harassed. The earliest I can get another technician is tomorrow morning. Marcus stood abruptly. Unacceptable. I have senators and judges attending tomorrow night. People who matter. Sir, if you'd just allow Ms. Mitchell. No, Marcus roared. Several people jumped. I don't care if she's a mechanical genius. I will not have those filthy hands anywhere near my vehicle. Do you understand me? The words hung like poison. Filthy hands. Through the glass, Sarah paused, shoulders hunched. She'd heard. Then she set down her tools with deliberate care and walked back. This time something was different in her posture. She'd crossed an invisible line. Mr. Whitmore, her voice carried across the showroom. Every conversation stopped. I need to tell you something. I have nothing to say to you. Gerald, get this woman. Before you what? Before you humiliate me further? Steel entered her voice. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm the daughter of James Mitchell. The name hit like a physical blow. James Mitchell. No. Impossible. His shock must have shown because Sarah's expression shifted to satisfaction. I see you remember him. James Mitchell. His mentor. The man who'd taken a chance on him. Taught him everything. The man whose trust Marcus had betrayed spectacularly. James Mitchell's daughter. Marcus whispered, his throat suddenly constricting. The blood drained from his face. His hands, which had been so steady moments ago, began to tremble. The phone in his grip nearly slipped to the floor. That's right. The James Mitchell whose firm you destroyed. Who lost everything because of your lies. Who spent 3 years trying to rebuild before dying of a stroke. Alone in a rented room, everything he'd built scattered to the wind. Sarah's voice remained steady, but her eyes glistened. Still trying to understand how his protege, the boy he'd mentored like a son, had become his destroyer. Complete silence. Marcus felt dizzy. I didn't. You did. Sarah stepped closer. You took everything my father built and used it to create your empire. When he tried to fight back, you destroyed his reputation so thoroughly that no one believed him. Marcus looked around desperately at shocked faces staring with disgust. Sarah, He reached out, but she stepped back. Don't touch me with those hands. Those hands that signed documents stealing my father's company, that shook hands with his partners while poisoning them against him, that pushed him from the industry he loved. Marcus understood with devastating clarity. She'd let him reveal his prejudice and arrogance, then exposed him for what he was, a man who built success on betrayal. You said my hands were filthy. Sarah held them up. These hands are stained with honest work, with grease and oil from fixing things, making things better. But your hands, Mr. Whitmore, your hands are covered in blood. Genuine, overwhelming shame flooded through him. Not mild discomfort, but soul-deep shame of being truly seen. I need to go, Marcus muttered. Your car is still here, Gerald said. Deference gone. Keep it. I don't care anymore. As Marcus stumbled toward the exit, Sarah's voice came once more, softer but devastating. My father used to talk about you. Even after everything, he'd say, Marcus was like a son to me. Where did I fail him? Marcus stopped at the door, turned back through tears. He blamed himself. Not you. He died thinking he'd failed as a mentor, that he hadn't taught you right values. He never accepted that you simply chose to become what you are. Marcus wanted to say something, anything, but there were no words. Only truth hanging between them, and the realization his carefully constructed world was crashing down. As he pushed through the door into cooling evening air, Marcus understood for the first time what his success truly cost. Not in dollars or properties or investment portfolios, but in human terms. Destroyed lives, shattered families. A good man dying with a broken heart, still believing he'd somehow failed the young man he'd loved like a son. The city stretched before him, millions of lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Each one represented someone, a life, a dream, a story. How many had he crushed in his climb to the top? How many Sarah Mitchells existed out there, carrying grief he'd created and never bothered to witness? The Bentley behind him represented months of wealth accumulation. The suit he wore cost more than some family's monthly rent. The watch on his wrist could feed a family for a year. But standing here, shaking in the October air, Marcus felt more impoverished than he'd ever been growing up in the Bronx projects. Back then, he'd had hope. He'd had dreams. He'd had James Mitchell believing in him. Now he had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered. The question wasn't whether Sarah would expose him further. He knew Manhattan society well enough to understand that ship had sailed the moment he'd roared those words about filthy hands in a room full of witnesses. By tomorrow morning, every country club, every boardroom, every charity gala would be buzzing with the story of Marcus Whitmore's humiliation. The question was simpler and far more terrifying. Could a man who'd become a monster learn to be human again? Or had he traveled too far down that dark road to ever find his way back to the light? For now, Marcus stood on the sidewalk, watching traffic flow past in an endless stream, each car carrying people toward destinations and purposes. People going home to families. People who could look at themselves in mirrors without flinching. People whose hands weren't stained with the blood of betrayal. He thought of James Mitchell's face the last time they'd spoken. The confusion, the hurt, the desperate hope that there'd been some misunderstanding. The way his former mentor's voice had broken when he'd said, "Marcus, just tell me what I did wrong. Help me understand so I can fix it." Marcus had told him nothing. Had let him die believing he'd somehow failed. And now, 15 years later, that man's daughter had forced Marcus to finally see himself clearly. Not the titan of industry, not the wolf of Wall Street, not the brilliant investor everyone feared and respected, just a man who'd traded his humanity for wealth and discovered far too late that he'd made the worst deal of his life. Marcus didn't remember the taxi ride home. One moment he was standing outside Prestige Motors. The next he was fumbling with his apartment keys, hands still trembling. The penthouse that usually felt like a testament to his success now seemed like a museum of empty achievements. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a Manhattan skyline that suddenly looked cold and indifferent. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, the kind that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly salary, and collapsed onto his leather sofa. The amber liquid burned going down, but it did nothing to warm the ice spreading through his chest. James Mitchell's daughter, working as a mechanic, wearing coveralls stained with grease. The irony was almost poetic, almost cruel enough to be divine justice. Marcus closed his eyes, but that only made the memories sharper. James Mitchell had been more than a mentor. He'd been the father Marcus never had, the man who saw potential in a kid from the Bronx projects when everyone else saw another statistic waiting to happen. "You've got something special, Marcus," James had said during their first meeting, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been sitting behind a modest desk, not the ostentatious mahogany monuments Marcus would later favor. "Raw intelligence, yes, but more than that. You've got hunger. The question is, what are you hungry for?" Back then, Marcus had answered honestly, his voice still carrying traces of his Bronx accent. "To prove I'm worth something. To show everyone who said I'd amount to nothing that they were wrong. To make my mother proud before she—" He'd stopped, unable to finish the sentence about his mother's declining health. James had reached across the desk, squeezing Marcus's shoulder with genuine warmth. "Then let me help you channel that hunger into something meaningful. Success isn't just about proving people wrong, son. It's about building something that matters, something that lasts beyond your ego. Your mother would be proudest not of how much you made, but of who you became while making it." But Marcus hadn't listened. Not really. He'd taken James's lessons about strategy, negotiation, and market analysis. He'd absorbed everything about building wealth. But the lessons about integrity, about responsibility, about using success to lift others, those had fallen on deaf ears. His phone buzzed, then again, and again. Text messages flooding in, calls he didn't answer. The news was spreading faster than he'd anticipated. By morning, everyone who mattered in Manhattan's financial district would know what happened at Prestige Motors. One text made him pause. It was from Richard Thornton, a senior partner at his firm. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Be there." The scotch glass slipped from his hand, tumbling across the Persian rug. Marcus watched the amber liquid seep into the expensive fabric with detached fascination. $15,000 that rug had cost, now ruined, like everything else he'd touched. His mind drifted back 15 years, to the day everything changed. The day he'd stopped being James Mitchell's protege and became his destroyer. Mitchell and Associates had been thriving. James had built a boutique investment firm with an impeccable reputation, smaller than the giants, but respected for honest dealing and consistent returns. Marcus had been James's right hand, learning the business, earning trust, being groomed to eventually become a partner. Then the Hartwell deal appeared, a massive real estate portfolio liquidation worth $200 million. The commission alone would transform the firm, establish them among the elite. "This is our moment, Marcus," James had said, eyes bright with excitement. "But we have to be smart, conservative. The Hartwell family trusts us because we've never chased quick returns at the expense of sound advice." Marcus had nodded, smiled, agreed. But inside, something darker stirred. Why be conservative? Why settle for good when they could have everything? Late one night, Marcus accessed the firm's client database. He copied sensitive information, investment strategies, risk assessments, confidential portfolios. Then he approached the Hartwells directly, behind James's back, with an aggressive pitch that promised higher returns, faster growth, fewer restrictions. "Mr. Mitchell is a good man," Marcus had told them with practiced sincerity. "But he's from a different era. He doesn't understand the modern market's velocity. Let me show you what's really possible." The Hartwells had been intrigued. Meetings happened in secret. Marcus structured everything to make it look like James was the one being deceptive, holding back opportunities, protecting his own interests rather than theirs. When the truth emerged, when the Hartwells called James directly to question why he'd been hiding certain investment opportunities, James was blindsided, confused. He'd tried to explain, but Marcus had planted seeds of doubt so effectively that every explanation sounded like an excuse. "Marcus, help me understand," James had pleaded in his office, voice thick with betrayal. "These documents show information I never shared, client strategies I developed. How did the Hartwells get them?" Marcus had looked his mentor in the eye and lied with practiced ease. "I don't know, James. Maybe there's a leak in the office? Maybe someone else has been compromising client confidentiality?" The suggestion hung between them, subtle, poisonous, making James doubt his own staff, his own judgment. Within 3 months, Marcus had maneuvered himself into position to split from the firm, taking the Hartwell deal and 3 other major clients with him. He'd used James's own teachings about legal protection to ensure everything was technically permissible, even if morally bankrupt. James tried to fight. He hired lawyers, attempted to prove breach of contract, client poaching, misuse of confidential information. But Marcus had been careful. Every document signed properly, every communication ambiguous enough to deny intent. The legal battle destroyed James financially. His reputation suffered as Marcus's lawyers painted him as a bitter old man, unable to accept that his protege had simply outgrown him. Other clients, spooked by the controversy, quietly moved their accounts elsewhere. Mitchell and Associates collapsed within a year. Marcus's new firm, Whitmore Capital, rose from those ashes like a phoenix. Every dollar of seed money, every initial client, every strategic advantage, all built on the corpse of James Mitchell's dreams. Now, sitting in his penthouse with spilled scotch seeping into expensive carpet, Marcus finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd done. Not just to James, but to James's family, to Sarah, who'd been 17, 18, when her father's world fell apart. Had she watched her father's descent, seen him age overnight, shoulders bowing under guilt he didn't deserve? Did she hold his hand during those last moments before the stroke took him, still believing he'd somehow failed? Marcus's phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from his assistant. "Sir, there's already a blog post circulating about an incident at Prestige Motors. Should I prepare a statement?" He typed back with numb fingers. No, say nothing. What could he say? Deny it? Everyone there had heard him. Lie about who Sarah was. The truth would emerge anyway. Claim he was having a bad day? There was no excuse for what he'd said, what he'd done, both today and 15 years ago. Marcus walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. 42 floors below, the city pulsed with life. Millions of people, each with their own stories, their own struggles. How many James Mitchells were down there? How many people trying to do right in a world that rewarded ruthlessness? He thought about Sarah's hands. Filthy, he'd called them. Hands that fixed things, that made broken machines whole again. Hands that represented honest work, tangible value, real contribution to the world. What did his hands do? Push papers, sign documents, move digital numbers from one account to another, create nothing, fix nothing, just take, consolidate, accumulate. The irony burned. Sarah had chosen to work with her hands, to build something real, despite surely having the intelligence and education to follow her father into finance. She'd rejected that world entirely, and he judged her for it, sneered at her choice, called her inadequate, when she was actually the one who'd chosen integrity over empty prestige. His phone rang, not a text this time, but an actual call. The name on the screen made his stomach clench. Victoria Ashworth, the society columnist whose word could make or break reputations in Manhattan's elite circles. He answered before he could think better of it. "Victoria." "Marcus, darling." Her voice dripped with false sympathy. "I'm hearing the most extraordinary story about an incident at Prestige Motors. Tell me it's not true." "It's true." Pause. She'd expected denial, deflection, spin. "All of it? The things you said to that mechanic? About her hands? All of it. Marcus, you sound strange. Are you all right?" Was he all right? He almost laughed. "No, Victoria. I'm not all right. I haven't been all right for 15 years. I don't understand. Neither did I. Until today." He took a shaky breath. "That mechanic I insulted? She's James Mitchell's daughter." The silence on the other end stretched so long, Marcus thought she'd hung up. "James Mitchell," Victoria finally said, her voice different now. "The man whose firm you owe, Marcus." "Oh no." "Yeah." The word came out hollow. "Oh no, indeed. What are you going to do?" What was he going to do? The question of the century. "I don't know yet. But Victoria, when you write about this, and I know you will, tell the truth. All of it. I'm done with spin. Marcus, every word I said at Prestige Motors, who Sarah really is, what I did to her father, everything. It's time people knew exactly who Marcus Whitmore really is." He hung up before she could respond, before he could change his mind. The scotch bottle called to him, promising numbness, oblivion. He reached for it, then stopped. No. He'd spent 15 years numbing himself to his own conscience. Tonight, maybe for the first time in his life, he was going to feel everything he'd earned. Marcus sank to the floor, back against the wall, designer suit wrinkling against the baseboard, and finally let himself cry. Not the calculated tears of a man trying to garner sympathy at a funeral or charity event, but genuine, soul-deep sobs that shook his entire frame. His shoulders heaved. Snot ran down his face. His breath came in ragged gasps that would have horrified him if anyone could see. He cried for James, who'd died believing he'd failed, who'd spent his last years in a studio apartment instead of the brownstone he'd loved, whose obituary Marcus had read and then deliberately forgotten. For Sarah, forced to grow up too fast, to become too strong, carrying anger and grief he'd created with his ambition and cruelty. For the man he'd been once, full of hunger and hope, before ambition curdled into greed and hunger became gluttony. And perhaps most painfully, he cried for the relationships he'd never built, the life he'd never lived, the version of himself that had died the day he chose betrayal over loyalty. He had money, status, power, a penthouse view that people literally killed for, and absolutely no one who truly knew him. No one who saw past the expensive suits to the terrified boy from the Bronx, still trying to prove his worth. No one he could call at this moment who'd offer comfort without agenda, without calculating what they might gain from his vulnerability. James would have. Before the betrayal, James would have answered the phone at midnight, listened without judgment, offered wisdom born of genuine care. But Marcus had destroyed that. Destroyed the one person who'd actually loved him like a son. The city lights blurred through his tears, millions of points of light that seemed to mock his isolation. Tomorrow would bring consequences. The board meeting, Victoria's column, social media's merciless judgment, his carefully constructed empire beginning to crack. But tonight, alone in his expensive apartment, Marcus Whitmore finally understood something crucial. He wasn't afraid of losing his wealth or status. He was afraid of dying like James had, alone, confused, betrayed by someone he'd loved. He was afraid of becoming the lesson in someone else's story about what not to be, and he had no idea how to prevent that from happening. Marcus arrived at Whitmore Capital at 8:30, 30 minutes before the emergency board meeting. He'd barely slept. Maybe 2 hours of fitful unconsciousness, punctuated by dreams of James Mitchell's disappointed face. The mirror that morning had shown a stranger, eyes bloodshot and swollen, face haggard with deep lines that seemed to have appeared overnight. The carefully maintained mask of confidence finally cracked beyond any hope of repair. He'd put on his usual armor, a $3,000 suit, silk tie, Italian shoes, but they felt like a costume now, inappropriate for the man he was becoming. The usual morning greetings from staff were conspicuously absent. People avoided eye contact as if his gaze might contaminate them. Conversations died mid-sentence as he passed, the normal buzz of morning office energy replaced by an uncomfortable hush. His assistant, Catherine, who'd worked for him for 6 years with unwavering loyalty, couldn't meet his gaze as she handed him coffee. Her hand trembled slightly when their fingers almost touched. "They're waiting in the conference room," she said quietly, then added something that surprised him. "Mr. Whitmore, for what it's worth, I hope you find your way through this." The kindness in her voice nearly broke him. He nodded, unable to speak. The conference room overlooked Manhattan, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a painting. 8 board members sat around the table, their expressions ranging from anger to disgust to carefully neutral professionalism. Richard Thornton, the senior partner who texted him, sat at the head of the table where Marcus usually presided. "Sit down, Marcus," Richard said, voice devoid of warmth. Marcus took a chair at the opposite end, a deliberate positioning that wasn't lost on anyone. "I assume you know why we're here," Richard continued. "Victoria Ashworth's column went live at 6 this morning. It's already been picked up by 3 major outlets. The story is everywhere." Marcus had read it. Victoria had done exactly what he'd asked, told the complete, unvarnished truth. Every word he'd said at Prestige Motors, Sarah's identity, the full story of what he'd done to James Mitchell 15 years ago. She'd even included quotes from former Mitchell and Associates employees, people who'd lost their jobs when the firm collapsed. "I know," Marcus said simply. "That's it?" Thomas Chen, the youngest board member, leaned forward, his face flushed with anger. "Just I know? Do you have any idea what this is doing to the firm? Our phones haven't stopped ringing. 3 clients have already pulled their accounts. The Sanderson deal just fell through. That's $40 million in fees, Marcus. $40 million. I'm aware of the consequences." "Are you?" Margaret Preston, who'd been with the firm since its founding, removed her glasses, her disappointment palpable. "Because from where I'm sitting, you just burned down everything we've built together. Not just your reputation, but ours. We're all connected to this now." She was right. In the interconnected world of high finance, proximity to scandal was nearly as damaging as the scandal itself. "I want to resign," Marcus said. "Effective immediately. Complete separation from the firm. You can announce that I've been removed, that you had no knowledge of my past actions, that Whitmore Capital is implementing new ethical oversight, whatever narrative protects you." Silence. They'd clearly expected denial, deflection, lawyers, not capitulation. "That's not enough," said David Rosenthal, the firm's legal counsel. "We need damage control. A statement from you accepting responsibility but providing context, explaining how you've changed, showing remorse." "No," Marcus interrupted. "No spin, no PR campaign. I did what Victoria reported. Every word is true. I destroyed a good man's life because I was ambitious and ruthless and fundamentally broken. There's no context that makes that acceptable. Margaret stared at him. Who are you? And what have you done with Marcus Whitmore? The question hung in the air. Who was he? He'd spent 15 years being the man in the expensive suit, the deal-maker, the winner. But that man had been built on a foundation of betrayal. I'm someone who needs to fix what he broke, Marcus said quietly. Or at least try. This isn't just about your conscience, Thomas said. Our names are on this firm, our family's reputations, which is why I'm offering complete separation. My shares in the firm, my equity stake, everything. I'll sign it over for $1. Consider it a gift or payment for the damage I've caused. Either way, by noon today, I'll have no legal or financial connection to Whitmore Capital. Richard leaned back, studying Marcus with narrowed eyes. Why would you do that? Because holding on to it won't change anything. The money won't make me feel less guilty. The power won't bring James Mitchell back. And maybe, just maybe, cutting all ties will help you rebuild without my toxicity poisoning everything. This is a trick, Thomas said flatly. Some kind of manipulation. Marcus almost laughed. I spent 15 years manipulating people. Trust me, this isn't what that looks like. This is what surrender looks like. The board members exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening in looks and slight gestures. We need to discuss this privately, Richard finally said. Give us the room. Marcus stood, then paused. Before I go, Margaret, you've known me longer than anyone here. You were the first person James introduced me to when I started at Mitchell & Associates. Do you remember? Margaret's expression softened slightly. I remember. You were terrified, trying to hide it behind bravado. James saw right through you. He told me, that boy needs someone to believe in him. So we did. The words were a knife to Marcus's chest. I'm sorry for betraying that belief, for becoming exactly what James would have been ashamed to see. He left before anyone could respond, closing the door softly behind him. The hallway felt like a gauntlet. Employees pretended to work, but he felt their stares. Their judgment. He deserved all of it. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, then decided he'd hidden from enough things in his life. Hello? Mr. Whitmore? An unfamiliar woman's voice. Older, weary. My name is Dorothy Chen. I worked for James Mitchell as his office manager for 12 years. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. Mrs. Chen, I read Victoria Ashworth's column. I had to call you. I need you to understand what you did. Truly understand it. I'm listening. When the firm collapsed, I was 53 years old. I'd worked there since James started it. He was a good boss, fair, kind. When everything fell apart, he tried to keep paying us even though there was no money. He sold his watch, his car, trying to make payroll. Marcus closed his eyes, leaning against the wall. I watched him age 10 years in 10 months. Watched him stop sleeping, stop eating properly. His wife, Margaret, yes, same name as your board member, his sister worked there too. She'd bring him sandwiches because he'd forget to eat. And through it all, he kept saying, I must have done something wrong. Marcus wouldn't have left if I'd been a better mentor. Mrs. Chen, let me finish. Her voice cracked. The day before his stroke, he called me. Said he'd finally accepted that his career was over, but at least he'd tried to build something good. Said the only thing that still haunted him was failing you. Not losing the firm, not the bankruptcy. Failing you. Those were his last coherent words to me. I failed Marcus. Tears streamed down Marcus's face. Other employees walking past saw him crying and quickly looked away, uncomfortable with this display of vulnerability from someone they'd only known as cold and controlled. He didn't fail me, Marcus whispered. I failed him. I failed everything he tried to teach me. Why? Dorothy asked. That's what I've wondered for 15 years. Why destroy someone who loved you like a son? Because I was afraid, Marcus said, the truth emerging for the first time. Afraid I wasn't good enough. Afraid success wouldn't last. Afraid that if I didn't take everything I could grab, I'd end up back in the projects, back to being nothing. So I became something worse than nothing. I became someone who destroys good people. What are you going to do now? I don't know. But I owe it to James, to Sarah, to everyone I've hurt. I have to try to be better. Mr. Whitmore, For what it's worth, admitting what you did takes courage. James always said everyone deserves a chance at redemption. I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm not sure I can. But I hope you find a way to earn it." She hung up before Marcus could respond. He stood in the hallway, tears drying on his face, aware of the spectacle he was making. The great Marcus Whitmore, reduced to crying in public. 6 months ago, he would have been humiliated. Today, it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Catherine approached cautiously. "Mr. Whitmore, there's someone here to see you. She says it's important." "Who?" "Sarah Mitchell." Marcus's heart stopped. "She's here?" "Downstairs lobby. Security called. She doesn't have an appointment, but given the circumstances, send her up." The words came automatically, though his mind raced. Why would Sarah come here? To confront him further? To ensure his destruction was complete? 5 minutes later, Sarah stepped off the elevator wearing jeans and a simple blouse, no longer in coveralls. She looked tired, like she'd slept as poorly as he had. They stood facing each other in the reception area, neither speaking. Employees found reasons to walk past, watching the drama unfold. "Your office," Sarah finally said. Privately, Marcus led her to his office, soon to be his former office. The space that once represented his triumph now felt like a monument to wasted years. Sarah stood at the window looking out at the city. "I didn't come to gloat." "Then why?" She turned to face him, and her expression was complex. Anger still present, but mixed with something else. Sadness, maybe, or exhaustion. "Because last night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father's last words to me. He said, 'Sarah, don't let anger consume you.' I made that mistake with my failures, and look where it got me. Promise me you'll find peace." He didn't fail. I know that now, but he believed it. And I realized that carrying this hatred for you, it's not honoring his memory, it's poisoning mine. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "You're saying you forgive me?" "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "I'm saying I'm choosing not to let hating you define my life. There's a difference. You still destroyed my family. That doesn't go away because I decide to move forward. Then why come here? Because I need to know if yesterday was real or theater. Are you actually sorry, or are you just sorry you got caught?" Marcus met her gaze directly. "I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. And I know those words mean nothing against what I did. But I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to become someone worthy of the second chance your father would have given me." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "My father kept a journal. I found it after he died. One entry, written 6 months before his stroke, said, 'I still believe Marcus has goodness in him. Perhaps one day he'll find it again.'" The words shattered something in Marcus. "I don't deserve his faith." "No," Sarah agreed. "You don't. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is what you do with it anyway." She walked to the door, paused. "I'm not giving you absolution, Mr. Whitmore, but I'm giving you something my father would have wanted you to have. A chance to prove you can be better. Don't waste it." And she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of unearned grace and the terrifying responsibility of becoming someone worthy of it. He stood at the window where Sarah had stood moments before, looking out at the city that had witnessed his rise and was now witnessing something else entirely. Not his fall, exactly, but his choice to step down from the throne he'd built on broken trust. 3 weeks passed like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare from which Marcus was finally waking. He signed away his stake in Whitmore Capital, every signature feeling like a small death and rebirth simultaneously. He watched workmen remove his name from the glass doors, the letters peeling away to reveal clean space where his identity had been emblazoned in gold. He moved out of his penthouse into a modest one-bedroom apartment in Queens, the moving truck carrying only what he'd kept. Basic furniture, some clothes, a single box of personal items that suddenly seemed pathetically small given 42 years of life. The transition was jarring. From 42 floors above Manhattan with a doorman and concierge to a third-floor walk-up with thin walls, temperamental plumbing, and neighbors who played music at odd hours. The building smelled of cooking spices and old carpet, sounds of other lives bleeding through walls that seemed made of paper. His first morning there, he woke to the sound of a crying baby next door and traffic noise from the street below. For a moment, disorientation overwhelmed him. Then reality settled in. This was his life now. No staff, No driver, no assistant organizing his schedule. Just him and the consequences of 15 years of choices. He made coffee in a chipped mug he'd bought at a thrift store. Everything in the apartment was second-hand, purchased with the small amount he'd kept for living expenses. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was back where he'd started, in a neighborhood not far from the Bronx projects where he'd grown up. But this time felt different. This time, he'd chosen it. His phone, no longer the latest model, but a basic smartphone he'd bought used, showed a message from Margaret Preston. Despite the board's initial hostility, she'd reached out several times, checking on him with a kindness he didn't deserve. "Coffee today? My treat. There's something I want to discuss." They met at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from the usual haunts of Manhattan's financial elite. Margaret arrived in casual clothes, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her in the office. "You look different," she said, studying him across the table. Marcus glanced down at his jeans and plain shirt. "Poverty does that." "That's not what I meant. Your eyes. They're present. For 15 years, it was like talking to someone behind glass. Now you're actually here." The observation struck him. "I didn't realize I'd been gone. Most people don't." Margaret stirred her coffee slowly. "I wanted to tell you something. About James." Marcus braced himself. "When you first started working for him, I was skeptical. You were hungry in a way that worried me, like you'd eat the world if given the chance. I told James he was taking a risk, letting someone like you get close to his business. You were right. I was. But James said something I've never forgotten. He said, 'People who are that hungry are either running toward something or away from something. If we can show Marcus what's worth running toward, maybe he won't destroy himself running away.'" Marcus felt his throat tighten. "He tried to show me. I just wasn't listening." "No," Margaret agreed. "You weren't. But here's what I've been thinking about. James died believing he failed you, but maybe the real failure was that he died before you were ready to hear what he was saying. Some lessons take longer to learn. That doesn't excuse what I did to him. Nothing excuses it. But maybe understanding it is the first step to making sure you don't waste whatever time you have left. Which brings me to why I wanted to see you." Margaret pulled out a folder. "I've been contacted by several people who worked at Mitchell & Associates. They want to meet with you." Marcus's heart sank. "To confront me? I understand if... to heal." Margaret opened the folder, showing him names and contact information. "Not all of them. Some want nothing to do with you, and that's their right. But others, they've been carrying this for 15 years too. Dorothy Chen started a group. Former employees, clients who lost money, even James's sister. They've been meeting, processing, trying to move forward. And they want me there? Some do. They think facing you, hearing why you did it, understanding your perspective, it might help them let go. No guarantees it won't be painful, no promises of forgiveness. Just honest conversation." Marcus stared at the folder like it might contain explosives. "When?" "Tomorrow night, Brooklyn Community Center, 7 o'clock. Margaret pushed the folder across the table. "But Marcus, you need to understand. If you go, you have to be honest. Completely honest. These people lost jobs, savings, security because of you. They deserve the truth, even if it's ugly. Especially if it's ugly," Marcus said quietly. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on his second-hand mattress, staring at the ceiling, imagining the faces of people he'd destroyed. Dorothy Chen, who'd called him. James's sister, whose name he couldn't even remember. How many lives had he damaged without bothering to learn their names? The next evening, Marcus arrived at the community center early. The building was old but well-maintained, with scuffed floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. A far cry from the luxury conference rooms he was used to. A woman in her 60s approached him, extending her hand. "Mr. Whitmore? I'm Dorothy Chen. We spoke on the phone." Marcus shook her hand, struck by her firm grip. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Don't thank me yet. There are 12 people here tonight. Not everyone is happy about your presence." She gestured toward a meeting room. "Ready?" He wasn't, but he followed anyway. The room held a circle of chairs arranged with deliberate care, suggesting these meetings had happened before, that this group had developed rituals of healing. 11 people sat waiting, their faces showing various degrees of hostility, curiosity, and pain etched into expressions that had clearly lived with this burden for years. Marcus recognized none of them. which somehow made it worse. He'd destroyed people he couldn't even remember meeting, faces that should have mattered but had been invisible to him in his climb to the top. "Everyone," Dorothy said, "this is Marcus Whitmore. He's agreed to answer questions and participate in our healing process. Ground rules: no physical contact, no personal attacks. We're here for truth and closure, not revenge." Marcus sat in the empty chair, feeling their eyes on him like weights. A man in his 50s spoke first. "I'm Robert Hayes. I was James's accountant for 8 years. When the firm collapsed, I lost my reputation along with my job. It took me 3 years to find work again. My daughter had to drop out of college because I couldn't pay tuition." He leaned forward. "Why? What did James ever do to you except believe in you?" The directness of the question cut deep. "Nothing. He did nothing except treat me with kindness and trust. I destroyed him because I was terrified of being poor again, because I thought success meant taking everything before it could be taken from me. There's no good reason, Mr. Hayes. Just fear and greed and moral bankruptcy." "That's it? Fear?" A woman in her 40s faced tight with anger. "I'm Linda Morrison. I worked reception at Mitchell & Associates, single mother of 2. When the firm went under, I had no savings, no backup plan. We lived in my car for 3 months. My son was 8 years old, sleeping in a back seat because you were afraid." Marcus felt tears forming, but didn't let them fall. These people didn't need his tears. "Yes, because I was afraid and selfish, and I chose my comfort over your survival. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I am. Deeply, completely sorry." "Sorry doesn't pay back rent," Linda shot back. "No, it doesn't." Marcus looked around the circle. "I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back those years. But I need you to know, I see you now. I see what I did. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone who would never make that choice again." An older woman raised her hand slightly. "I'm Diane Mitchell, James's sister." Marcus's chest constricted. She had James's eyes, that same warmth mixed with sadness. "I watched my brother die," Diane continued, voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Watched him fade away, confused and heartbroken. His last lucid conversation was about you. He said, 'I must have pushed Marcus too hard, expected too much. If only I'd been a better teacher.' The words were devastating." Marcus bowed his head. "Look at me," Diane commanded. Marcus raised his eyes. "James loved you, truly loved you like the son he never had. And you killed him, not with a weapon, but with betrayal. That's murder in my book, Mr. Whitmore. So tell me, what makes you think you deserve a second chance?" The room fell silent. Everyone waited for his answer. "I don't," Marcus said finally. "I don't deserve a second chance. I don't deserve forgiveness or redemption or peace. But I'm hoping, desperately hoping, that I can earn the right to try. Not for me, but because James deserves to not have died believing he failed. He didn't fail. I did. And maybe if I can become the person he thought I could be, his death will mean something." Diane studied him for a long moment. James believed everyone deserves grace. Even people who don't deserve it. Especially people who don't deserve it. "I don't have his generosity of spirit, Mr. Whitmore, but I'm trying to honor his memory by at least attempting it." She stood, walked across the circle, and stopped in front of Marcus. "I'm not hugging you. I'm not forgiving you. But I'm acknowledging that you're trying, and that would have mattered to James." The meeting continued for 2 more hours. Each person shared their story, their pain, their anger. Marcus listened to every word, absorbing each wound he'd caused. Some people shouted at him, others spoke quietly, their pain more devastating than any rage. One man simply cried, unable to articulate his hurt. Through it all, Marcus didn't defend himself, didn't make excuses. He simply bore witness to the destruction he'd caused. When the meeting finally ended, Dorothy approached him. "That was hard. It should have been harder," Marcus said. "They were kind compared to what I deserve. Maybe. But you showed up. That counts for something." She hesitated. "We meet every other Thursday. You're welcome to come back. Not to speak, just to listen. To remember why you're trying to change." Marcus nodded, unable to trust his voice. Walking home through Brooklyn streets, Marcus felt different, not lighter. If anything, the weight was heavier now that he truly understood what he'd done. But it was a clean weight, An honest burden. Not the secret guilt he'd carried for 15 years, but acknowledged responsibility. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I heard about the meeting. That took courage. Sarah. She'd been keeping track of him. The thought was both terrifying and comforting. He typed back, "It took Dorothy Chen's grace and your father's legacy. I'm trying to be worthy of both." 3 dots appeared, then, "Keep trying. That's all any of us can do." Marcus slipped the phone into his pocket and continued walking. The city lights guiding him toward an apartment that wasn't home yet, but might be someday. Toward a life that wasn't comfortable or prestigious but felt honest in ways his penthouse never had. Toward a future that wasn't guaranteed or mapped out but at least meant something beyond accumulation and conquest. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus Whitmore was running toward something instead of away from it. Toward redemption he might never fully achieve. Toward peace he might never fully deserve. And that small shift, that choice to move toward light instead of away from darkness, made all the difference. 6 months later, Marcus stood outside Prestige Motors, his heart pounding against his ribs. He wasn't there for his Bentley. That had been sold months ago. The money distributed among James Mitchell's former employees through Dorothy Chen's coordination. He was there for something more important. Sarah had agreed to meet him. Not in his world anymore, but in hers. Through the glass, he could see her working on a silver Mercedes, her movements confident and precise. She wore the same coveralls that had once triggered his contempt, but now he saw them for what they truly represented. Honest work, real skill, a choice to build rather than destroy. Gerald, the service manager, spotted him first. The recognition in his eyes was wary but not hostile. 6 months ago, Marcus had written personal apology letters to every staff member who'd witnessed his outburst. He hadn't expected forgiveness, just wanted them to know he understood what he'd done. "Mr. Whitmore," Gerald said carefully, "Sarah mentioned you'd be stopping by. Thank you for allowing it. I know I'm not exactly welcome here. You're not the same man who walked out that door 6 months ago." Gerald studied him. That counts for something. Sarah emerged from the service bay, wiping her hands on a cloth, leaving the Mercedes in capable hands of a junior technician she was training. In jeans and a simple t-shirt, grease still smudged on her forearm, she looked more real than anyone Marcus had encountered in his years of luxury. There was no pretense about her, no performance, just authentic presence. "You came," she said. "You asked me to." They walked to a small park 2 blocks away, settling on a bench beneath an old oak tree. Autumn leaves drifted down around them, the world in transition just like Marcus himself. "I've been following your progress," Sarah said. "Dorothy tells me you haven't missed a single meeting. Those meetings are the most important thing I do. Hearing how my choices affected real people, it keeps me grounded in what matters. Margaret says you're working at a community center in the Bronx now, teaching financial literacy to kids from low-income families." Marcus smiled slightly. "It's ironic, isn't it? I spent 15 years using my financial knowledge to take from people. Now I'm trying to use it to help kids avoid the mistakes I made. To show them that success isn't measured in how much you accumulate, but in how many lives you improve." Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the leaves fall. "My father would have liked that. He always said the true purpose of education was to lift others up, not to climb over them." The mention of James created a familiar ache in Marcus's chest. "I think about him every day. Wonder what he'd say to me now. I think he'd say you're finally learning the lessons he tried to teach you 15 years ago. Better late than never." Sarah turned to face him. "But I didn't ask you here to talk about my father. I asked because there's something you need to know." Marcus felt his stomach clench. "What is it?" "I've been working on something. A scholarship fund in my father's name. Nothing institutional or public, just a small fund to help students who want to study business ethics. Kids who care about doing things right, not just doing things profitably." "That's beautiful, Sarah. James would be proud. I want you to be part of it." The words hung in the air. Marcus stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "What? Not your money. I don't want your money. But I want your story. I want you to meet with scholarship recipients. Tell them what you did, what it cost you, what you've learned. Be a living lesson in why integrity matters." Marcus felt tears threatening. "Why would you trust me with something connected to your father's memory?" "Because you've earned it." Sarah's voice was firm. Not through grand gestures or public redemption tours. Through small, consistent choices. Showing up to those meetings every week even when it's painful. Working with those kids even though it pays barely anything. Living in that tiny apartment when you could probably rebuild your wealth if you wanted to. You're proving day by day that change is possible. I'm not doing it for recognition, Sarah. I'm doing it because it's right. I know. That's exactly why I'm asking. She reached into her bag, pulling out a folder. This is Carlos Rodriguez. He's 17, brilliant with numbers, wants to study finance. His father died when he was young, and his mother works 2 jobs. He reminds me of my father, idealistic, ethical, determined to make a difference. Marcus looked at the photo of a young man with bright eyes and a hopeful smile. He saw himself at that age, full of hunger, but not yet corrupted by it. He needs a mentor, Sarah continued, someone who can guide him through the world of finance without losing his soul in the process. Someone who knows exactly what it costs to sell your integrity. You want me to mentor him. I want you to help him become the person you could have been if you'd listened to my father. To ensure that someone else carries forward the legacy of ethical business that James believed in. Sarah's voice grew softer. I can't give you forgiveness, Marcus. That's not mine to give. But I can give you purpose. A chance to make sure my father's death meant something. Marcus looked at Carlos's photo through blurred vision. What if I fail him? What if I'm not strong enough to? Then you'll fail, honestly, which is better than succeeding dishonestly. Sarah placed her hand briefly over his, the first time she'd willingly touched him. My father used to say that the measure of a person isn't whether they fall, but whether they get back up and try again. You've gotten back up, Marcus. Now help someone else stay standing. That evening, Marcus met Carlos at a coffee shop in the Bronx. The young man was nervous, fingers drumming on the table, eyes darting around like he didn't quite belong in this world yet. Mr. Whitmore? Carlos extended his hand. Ms. Mitchell said you'd be able to help me understand business school applications. Marcus shook his hand, remembering another handshake years ago, when James Mitchell had first welcomed him into the world of finance. The circle was continuing, but this time with different intentions. Before we talk about applications, Carlos, I need to tell you a story about a man who had everything he thought he wanted and discovered it meant nothing. For the next hour, Marcus told his story. Not the sanitized version he might have shared a year ago, but the brutal truth. Every betrayal, every rationalization, every moment he'd chosen ambition over integrity. Carlos listened with widening eyes, occasionally interjecting questions that showed he understood exactly what was at stake. So you lost everything? Carlos asked when Marcus finished. I lost everything that didn't matter and found everything that did. I lost wealth and gained purpose, lost status and gained authenticity. Lost my empire and gained my soul back. Marcus leaned forward. Carlos, you're going to face choices in your career. Moments where doing the right thing costs you something you want. I'm here to tell you, pay that cost. Every single time. Because the alternative is building a life that looks successful from the outside, but feels hollow from the inside. But how do you know? How do you know which choice is right? Ask yourself, what would the person I want to become do? Not the person I am, not the person I think I should be, the person I truly want to become, and then do that, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Carlos nodded slowly, processing. Ms. Mitchell told me you were her father's student once, that you made mistakes but you're trying to fix them. I made more than mistakes, Carlos. I made choices that destroyed good people. But Sarah's father believed in second chances, in redemption, in the power of people to change, and his daughter is giving me the chance to prove he was right. Marcus met the young man's eyes. Don't waste your first chance the way I did. Learn from my failures so you don't have to make them yourself. They talked until the coffee shop closed, Carlos filling pages of notes about business school, ethics, career planning. But more importantly, they talked about values, integrity, what truly mattered in life. As they parted ways, Carlos turned back. Mr. Whitmore, thank you for being honest. A lot of adults try to act like they've always had it together. It helps to know that even successful people make mistakes. The trick is learning from them, Marcus said, and then teaching others so your mistakes become lessons, instead of just regrets. Walking home through familiar Bronx streets, Marcus thought about the strange journey that had brought him full circle. He'd started here, hungry and ambitious. He'd climbed to the top of Manhattan, built an empire, acquired everything money could buy, and then he'd lost it all and ended up back where he began. But he wasn't the same person. The boy who'd left these streets had been running from poverty, from invisibility, from feeling worthless. The man returning to them was running towards something better: purpose, authenticity, connection. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Carlos just messaged me. He said you changed his life tonight. Thank you." Marcus typed back. "He reminded me of who I could have been. Thank you for giving me the chance to help him become that person." Her response came quickly. "My father always said the best way to honor someone's memory is to live the lessons they tried to teach. You're finally doing that. He'd be proud." Marcus stopped walking, letting those words wash over him. James would be proud. Not of the empire Marcus had built on betrayal, not of the wealth he'd accumulated through cruelty, but of this. Standing on a Bronx street corner, having just mentored a kid who needed guidance, choosing purpose over profit. The next morning, Marcus woke in his small apartment, sunlight streaming through windows that looked out onto normal people living normal lives. He made coffee in his chipped mug, dressed in his thrift store clothes, and prepared for another day teaching financial literacy to kids who needed to believe there was a path forward. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a corner office or a driver, or people jumping to fulfill his every whim, but it was real. It mattered. And for the first time in his adult life, when Marcus looked in the mirror, he didn't flinch. He saw someone who'd failed spectacularly, hurt people deeply, and lost almost everything. But he also saw someone who'd chosen to get back up, to face the damage he'd caused, to spend his remaining years building instead of destroying. Success, Marcus had finally learned, wasn't measured in bank accounts or penthouses or power. It was measured in lives touched, in mistakes acknowledged, in the daily choice to be better than you were yesterday. James Mitchell had tried to teach him that 15 years ago. Sarah had forced him to finally listen. And now Marcus would spend whatever time he had left passing that lesson forward. One conversation, one kid, one choice at a time. The city stretched before him, full of people rushing toward their own definitions of success. Marcus joined the flow, no longer trying to rise above the crowd, but simply to move alongside them. Connected, human, finally, truly alive. And somewhere, he liked to imagine, James Mitchell was watching with those kind eyes, finally able to stop blaming himself, because his student had learned the lesson after all, just took the long, painful way to get there. But then, the most important lessons usually do.